before history, there was memory, and before every story ever written, there was the trembling hand of a human being, reaching through darkness, carving meaning into the world. This is not just the story of writing, it's the story of how we learn to become eternal. Before the first word, there was the breath, and before the breath, there was silence. It was not an empty silence, but one filled with waiting, like the pause before the dawn, like the stillness before the birth of thought. Humanity stood at the edge of the world, surrounded by shadows and starlight, and felt something stirring inside, the need to remember. Long before ink, before paper, before even the idea of language, humans carried their worlds inside their minds. Memory was not just a skill, it was survival. Around the warmth of the fire, tribes gathered. Flames flickered like the heartbeat of the night, and every ember carried a story. There were no books, no libraries, only the fragile bridge between one generation and the next, the human voice. They spoke of the hand and the storm, of spirit and ancestors, of death and dawn. Every tale carried a fragment of truth, a map of existence. When they told stories, they weren't only recounting what had happened, they were building a world, one wordless rhythm at a time. But memory is a wild creature. It fades, it changes, it forgets. What one elder said could vanish with their final breath, and with it, a universe of wisdom. So, deep within the human spirit, a question began to form, quiet, trembling, but unstoppable. How can I make what I know stay? How can I make what I feel endure beyond me? That question was the first spark of writing, though no one could name it yet. The world then was alive with sighs. The wind etched patterns on the sand. The river drew lines through the earth. Lightning painted symbols across the sky. Perhaps it was there, in nature's restless handwriting, that the first humans began to see meaning, to imagine that perhaps the world itself was speaking, and all they needed to do was answer. So they began to mark on bone, on stone, on the skin of trees. They didn't yet write words, they wrote wonder, a spiral for the sun, a line for the path, a handprint for I was here. Each mark was an attempt to defy time, to say that something existed even after the voice that spoke it was gone. The fire became the first teacher. Its light revealed that the human urge to create is the same as the urge to survive. To make a mark was to claim existence. It was to say, I have seen the stars, and they have seen me. And so the cave became the first cathedral. The walls became the first pages, and those who painted them, the first authors of humanity. They crouched before flickering flames, grinding pigment of earth and blood, whispering to the spirit of what was and what might be. On those walls, they drew not only what they saw, but what they felt, the hand, the fear, the triumph, the mystery of being alive. Their stories were not written in letters, but in movement and color. wild animals charging through time, hands pressed to stone as if to hold on to eternity. Every handprint was a prayer. Let me not be forgotten. Thousands of years later, those marks still whisper through the dark. In caves like Lassu, Altamira, and Tassili, the ancestors speak across millennia. Their words are images, their sentences are gestures, and still they reach us. It's as if the human soul, from its earliest breath, refused to vanish. But it wasn't only about survival. Something else was being born in those painted chambers. Consciousness itself. For to draw a thing, one must first see it not merely as it is, but as it could be. The artist hunter painting the bison was doing more than remembering a hand. They were imagining, and imagination, that sacred mirror between the visible and the invisible, is the root of every poem, every scripture, every dream humanity has ever written. When dawn rose outside the caves, the painters would step into the light, and the world itself would seem changed. For in recording it, they had transformed it. They had created the idea that life could be preserved, translated, transmitted. They had given birth to the first memory that could outlive the body. From that fire onward, every act of creation, every poem, every letter, every digital message today carries a spark from that same flame. The need to remember, the need to be remembered, the need to say, I existed, I mattered, I left a mark. And so, writing began long before words. It began when the human heart looked at the night sky and saw not stars, but stories. When hands trembled with the desire to translate experience into symbol. When the silence of the world became too vast to hear alone. That was the first moment of authorship, the birth of writing soul. It was not an invention, it was a revelation, a whisper that said, everything passes, but the mark remains. The cave dweller's torch may have burned out thousands of years ago, but its light still lives in every glowing screen, in every page turned, in every word written in love, grief, or hope. We are, all of us, descendant to that fire, and perhaps that is what writing truly is, the oldest form of remembering that we were here. When humankind first lifted its gaze from the ground and began to wander, the world unfolded in meaning. The sun was no longer just warmth, it was a god. The river was no longer only water, it was memory flowing through time. And in that awakening, symbols were born. The marks carved on stone and bone were not yet language, but they were the first attempt to capture thought itself. A hunter carved lines to count the days. A mother scratched symbols to mark the passing moons of pregnancy. A tribe itched spirals to remember their dead. Each stroke was both an act of faith and defiance. Faith in the endurance of meaning, and defiance against the river of forgotten or forgetting. Then the marks became more intricate, from tallies of pictographs, from images to abstraction. In Sumer, the people of clay and river invented cuneiform, pressing reeds into wet tablet. In Egypt, scribes covered the walls of eternity with hieroglyphs, sacred carvings, where sound and spirit dance together. And in the valleys of the Indus and the mountains of China, other forms of script were born, each one a rhythm of a different soul. These were not mere letters, they were living gods. To write was to touch divinity, to bring invisible thought into visible being. Writing became power. The priest who could write could summon rain or curse an enemy. The ruler who controlled the scribes controlled the memory of his people. Through writing, the world became structured, named, measured, owned. The dawn of thought gave birth to civilization, but it also created distance. What was once shared through song and story became stored in stone and sealed in silence. Knowledge became guarded. The sacred act of remembering became a privilege. Yet, even as writing became law and property, the spirit that first burned in the caves did not die, it evolved. For though kings might use it to command, poets used it to dream, and dreamers in every age have been the true keepers of the word. The Nile flowed like ink through the veins of the desert, and on its banks humanity discovered a new material, papyrus. Thin, light, and portable, it transformed writing from an act of carving into an act of flight. For the first time, words could travel. The Egyptians rolled their papyrus scrolls like veins of memory, filled with hymens, prayers, and decrees. But beyond Egypt, in Babylon, on clay tablets still warm from the fire, scribes recorded the epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's first great story, where a king sought immortality and found only wisdom. It was as if the first storytellers were already aware of their own impermanence, using words as a shield against oblivion. Writing became the architecture of empire. Every kingdom built not only walls, but archives. Each law carved, each letter sealed, was a brick in the invisible fortress of civilization. And yet, with every inscription of power, another kind of writing persisted, the writing of prayer, of poetry, of prophecy. In every temple there were scribes, patient, unseen, bending over the tables by lamplight, transcribing the soul of the world. They wrote not for kings, but for eternity. They believed that the divine itself spoke through symbols, that ink could bridge heaven and earth. And in a way it did. For the first time, humans began to believe that truth could be written, that the sacred could be preserved, not just remembered. But truth, once written, could also be interpreted and misinterpreted. And so began the long and beautiful struggle between the word as revelation and the word as control. Writing had now become more than a human act. It had become destiny. Through it, empires rose and fell. Through it, prophets spoke and tyrants ruled. Through it, humanity sought not only to describe the world, but to define it. In monasteries, temples, and scriptoria, the act of writing became prayer. The scribe was both artist and saint. Each stroke of the quill was an act of devotion, each letter a fragment of eternity. In the East, Chinese scholars dipped their brushes in black silk ink and let it flow like thought itself. In the Middle East, the Quran was revealed, a divine text that would shape not just faith but civilization. And in the West, monks spent lifetimes illuminating manuscript, gilding the word of God with gold leaf and patience. Writing was now sacred light, a way to preserve the divine in human form. It was not enough to speak of God, one had to write God into being. For many, ink was not black but luminous, the color of revelation. The act of writing became ritual, its rhythm a meditation. In every alphabet, every script, every holy book, the same mystery paused. How can something so fragile as a mark of ink carry something as vast as eternity? And yet, within this holiness, there was humanity. Trembling hands, sleepless night, eyes straining in candlelight. They were not only preserving faith, they were preserving knowledge. When cities burned, when empires fell, when conquerors erased histories, the scribes wrote quietly, persistently, defiantly. They copied texts of medicine, astronomy, philosophy, poetry. They became the secret guardians of civilization's memory. It is said that when a scribe finished a sacred text, they would whisper a prayer. May these words outlive me, and most did. The fall of Rome plunged much of the world into darkness, but in that darkness there were candles. High in the stone monasteries of Ireland, Italy, and Byzantium, monks bent over parchment for decades, copying the wisdom of the ancient world. They wrought through winters so cold that the ink froze in the well. They copied through plagues, wars, and famine. They wrought not for fame, not for gold, but for faith in the human mind, in the power of remembrance. Every manuscript they completed was an act of resurrection. Each word rewritten was a bridge across centuries. It was as if, through their quills, they were whispering to the future, "Do not forget us." Without them, Aristotle would be a ghost. Without them, Homer's voice would be dust. Without them, history itself might have fallen silent. Their lives were marked by silence, by discipline, by sacrifice. But within that silence, the word endured, waiting to awaken again. And when it did, the world would change forever. For thousands of years, knowledge had moved at the pace of a hand. Every book, every letter, every scroll was born in patience, in candlelight, in silence. And then one man changed everything. His name was Johannes Gutenberg, a craftsman from Mainz. He was not a king, not a priest, not a prophet, yet his invention would shake all three. In 1450, he combined lead, oil, and paper to create the printing press, and in doing so, he freed the word. Ink met metal, and the word became fire. Books that once took years to copy could now be printed in days. Ideas began to move faster than armies. The church, the court, the scholar, all lost their monopoly on knowledge. For the first time, truth became something that could be shared, not guarded. A peasant could read the same page as a priest. A student could question a king. And with that, the Renaissance was born. Poets, philosophers, and scientists emerged like constellations across Europe. Leonardo dreamed in sketches. Copernicus dared to move the earth. Shakespeare gave language to the soul itself. Books became mirrors for the mind. The word, once divine and distant, became human. The printing press did not just multiply books, it multiplied possibility. And yet, with each page printed, a new truth arose. Once the word could be copied, it could also be changed. Truth was no longer eternal. It was debatable, alive, dangerous, but danger was the price of awakening. The world had found its new fire. When the world had learned to read, it began to learn to feel. The quill, once used to record the lives of kings, now traced the lives of the ordinary. Poets turned inward, philosophers looked within. Writing became not just a record of history, but a revelation of the human heart. Letters traveled across oceans, carrying love and longing. Journals became sanctuaries for thought that could not be spoken aloud. The novelist was born, the new chronicle of the soul. Through words, we began to understand ourselves. From Rumi's ecstatic poems to Rousseau's confessions, from Victor Hugo's cries for justice to Jane Austen's quiet rebellion. The page became the mirror where humanity saw its own reflection for the first time. The world changed because the inner world had changed. Empires rose and fell, but the writer remained, a witness, a prophet, a lover of truth. In every age, the same heart spoke through different tongues. Write, for to write is to live twice. Every sentence became a fragment of immortality, and in that immortality, humanity found meaning. The world grew louder, faster, brighter. Factories hissed, trains screamed, and the rhythm of the machine echoed in every street, and then it entered the act of writing. The typewriter arrived. Metal keys replaced the fiddle. Words no longer flowed softly from ink. They struck the page like thunder. Click, clack, click. The sound of modern thought. It was the age of revolution and revelation. Hemingway wrote of courage and loss. Virginia Woolf of consciousness and silence. James Baldwin wrote of rage and freedom. Each keystroke was an act of defiance against the noise of conformity. Writing was no longer only about beauty, it was about truth. The typewriter gave writers a new rhythm, fast, mechanical, relentless. It became the drum beat of the 20th century, where thought raised the head of the word itself. In smoky cafes, in war-torn rooms, in quiet studies, writers tapped their heart into history. They wrote not just to record, but to resist. For every age of chaos, birds' voices that refused to be silenced. The machine did not kill the soul, it gave it tempo. And then came light. Screens flickered on, and words once pressed into paper now floated in the air. Writing became instant, everywhere, for everyone. The internet opened the gate of Babel once more. Billions of voices rose, from the whisper of a poem to the roar of a crowd. We began to live inside language itself. Every message, every post, every digital echo, all of it writing, all of it memory. We write in seconds what our ancestors wrote in lifetimes. We preserve everything, and yet we forget faster than ever. The cloud remembers more than any library in history, but it also erases meaning in its flood. When everyone can write, few listen or few still listen. When words multiplied infinitely, silence becomes precious again. Yet, within this storm of data, the same fire burns, the same ancient desire to reach out, to be understood, to be known. Each through the cold light of a screen, humanity still writes to bridge its solitude. Perhaps the medium has changed, but the need has not. The fire of memory still flickers, though it glows now in pixels. We are still trying to say the same thing our ancestors whispered in caves. Remember me. From the caves to the cloud, from ashes to algorithms, the story of writing is the story of us. Every letter we write carries the echo of every hand that has ever marked the earth before us. We are not just readers of history. We are its continuation. Every message, every note, every poem, every book is another verse in humanity's eternal conversation with itself. Writing is not an invention. It's a pulse, the heartbeat of consciousness. To write is to give shape to what the heart feels and the mind cannot hold. It is to lift the invisible into the visible, to turn pain into poetry, memory into meaning, silence into song. The writer within us all is not the one who knows, but the one who wanders, who reaches into the dark and leaves a trace of light, who says, I was here, I dreamed, I loved. When all else is gone, the empires, the machines, the screens, words will remain. They always do, because as long as we write, we are not alone. The story of writing is the story of our becoming. From fire to ink, from ink to light. It's not just how we learn to communicate, it's how we learned to be human. If you listen closely, you can still hear it. The scratching of a stylus on clay, the echo of a quill, the hum of a keyboard. Across centuries, across languages, across worlds, the same act continues, the same miracle. To write is to remember, and to remember is to live forever. We do not just tell stories, we become them. The words we write outlive our breath, carrying fragment of our souls into tomorrows we will never see. So write, speak, mark the world with your presence, because the oldest truth is still the simplest. The world forgets everything except what is written.